Hello, everyone, and welcome to Accelerate Global 2020 Online. I'm joined today by our speaker, Paul Greenberg, and our U.S. Head of Sales, Andy Zambito. I'll let the gentlemen introduce themselves, and we're so pleased to have each of them on today as we interview Paul Greenberg.
Well, hi, thank you for having me. I'm Andy Zambito. I'm the Chief Sales Officer for the Americas at Creatio, and very excited to participate in Accelerate Global today.
And I'm Paul Greenberg. I'm the Managing Principal of the 56 Group LLC and also the author of CRM at the Speed of Light. And I've known Creatio since 2011, so I'm really happy to be here today.
Excellent. Well, Paul, thank you so much again for joining us today. We're very excited to get your take on the changing face of business transformation in our new normal. 2020 has been a year of surprises and unexpected circumstances. And it's important for us to talk about new business transformation needs and business expectations. And we're all very much looking forward to doing this with an industry veteran who has worked firsthand with many of the world's great enterprises. So maybe I can kick things off with a question of, maybe you could share your perspective on how digital transformation is reshaping businesses worldwide, how that'll continue to reshape as we enter 2021. And also, if you might, do you feel that COVID-19 has emphasized the need for companies to stay ahead of the innovation curve?
So, this might surprise you a little. The thing is, for years and prior to COVID-19, digital transformation has been at least on the lips of a lot of companies, a lot of people, but it's mostly been on the lips of a lot of companies, a lot of people. There hasn't really been as much action as you would assume there has been. What's become really critical is that people have actually begun to understand, and I'm using that very carefully, and you'll understand why in a second, have begun to understand that it's become a mission critical part of doing business, as opposed to something we need to do because everyone else is doing it, or something we need to do because it's the buzzword of the minute, or something we need to do for the purposes of just, say, improved efficiencies at the workplace or something like that, right? What's actually happened especially due to the pandemic, has been a massive acceleration of that requirement for digital transformation. It's gone from, I'll call it more than nice to have, but less than a requirement, to a full-blown requirement. However, and this is the big however, because if you look at almost all of the extant literature now, and even from some of my fellow analysts, because I'm also an industry analyst, among other things I do, and from among some of the, let's say, thought leaders in the space, you'll see, well, we're now, because of COVID-19, we're now on a sprint to the finish line when it comes to digital transformation. And honestly, no, we're not, right? Here's the deal, right? What we're doing now, all of this that we've seen throughout the entire world, this is an increased use of digital tools. It's not digital transformation. Digital transformation means changes in business models. It means changes and support from a culture, right? There's a number of other things that have to happen for digital transformation to actually be permanent, effective, and actually what I hope all want, engaging for the customer as well as the employees of the company. And so we're seeing lots more use of digital tools. And what that's done, importantly, is digital transformation has now become not just words on lips, but part of how companies are beginning to strategize and think. But we're not on a sprint to the finish line, we're on a sprint to the starting line for this, right? And right. Because I'll tell you what, and take this as advice coming from a mouthy New Yorker, which is pretty much what I am. If you're being smart, you'll understand this is the starting line. If you're being stupid, you'll treat it as the finish line. And because right now that you're all using those digital tools, now that people are using them at their big enterprises, at their little companies, the question becomes how to not just make the use of the tools permanent, but what does that mean for your business model, your pricing, the packages you provide, the solutions you think you had, now you no longer can provide. What does that mean for your culture? How are you going to support a culture that, in likelihood, given the new normal that we're facing, is going to be at least in part, significant part, remote, right? How are you going to do that, right? Those things that you should be thinking about, not, hey, we're using the tools, we've digitally transformed.
Well, Paul, I'm actually going to modify my next question based on that response. Then, we talked a lot about pace, right, and the belief versus the actual doing. What bottlenecks or additional challenges then do you anticipate for the folks that are looking to do that rapid digital transformation in their mind, and what will that uncover for them? You think that's going to make that challenging?
Well, this one obvious one, if you're actually doing a genuine digital transformation, you're changing, you're at least modifying, if not fully changing, because not every company has to change everything.
Right.
You're changing your business model, right? And changing your business model means your pricing is going to change. The offerings you have will probably change. The way you the way you get the offerings distributed will probably have to change. The way they get consumed will have to change. And then you run into the culture, right? Meaning,
right.
And with all these changes, a lot of jobs will change and job descriptions will change, right? And training will have to occur. So what happens? There's costs to this that are maybe hidden to you now because it's remote and you think you're saving a fortune by not being in your office and so on and so forth. But there are costs to this which will emerge clearly once you actually get the fact that this is a fundamental transformation to how you are actually doing your business. Now, to that point, a lot of companies may make the decision, we can't do that because we just can't afford it. And that's fair. I mean, you can't. One of the things I hate, and I really hate this about our industry sometimes, is that we make everything so black and white. Like if you don't do this, you're dead, right? And that's not true. First of all, you can do this in part. Secondly, sometimes you can't do it. So you try to, it may mean, for example, like, okay, as a business, you want to explode. You want to just blow the doors off. But honestly, you can't afford to do it. So what you do is you incrementally improve over a longer period of time than you would have liked. It's still an improvement. It's still positive. You have to also accomplish the things you can accomplish, not realistically, and take reasoned risks when it comes to digital transformation. Part of that hidden obstacle is understanding what a reasonable risk is, okay, especially in the time now. Because I will tell you this, and this is something that I don't think a lot of people take into account. The CDC did this study about, I guess it was about the beginning of this year as COVID was starting to hit, but it might have been a little actually even before that, but it was basically on how people think and respond in crises, right? And there were a lot of very simple things, a lot of things that were sort of amazing that popped up. Like one was people are looking for very simple answers, number one. Number two is they will hold on as long as they can to what they believed, right? Even in the face of something that says it's no longer true. And number three is they'll often believe the first thing they hear, right? So now here's the thing. That's just a few things. But what that tells you is you're making decisions in that kind of environment across the globe. When this finally does pass, meaning vaccination will be there, we know there's going to be a new normal, next normal, a new abnormal, whatever the hell you want to call it. But there's going to be something else, right? And most people seem to think it'll be a hybrid of remote and in person in some way. But the thinking will not be the same as crisis thinking. And you have to really take that into account because you're building a permanent transformation of your business or a permanent change in how you're doing it, or at least a permanent incremental evolution of your business. And you can't think only in terms of crisis. You have to think past it and well beyond it and that's a big obstacle because most people think in the moment, right? And so I think arguably the psychology of it all will be the biggest obstacle, even though it's probably the one that will be least talked about.
Very fair, and certainly I appreciate that response. And you mentioned throughout there, tools and obviously technology is an enabler in all of this. How has all those things you just talked about, how has that impacted the business expectations from technology?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that, actually. I mean, look, ultimately, there's two things. There's the business expectations of what a technology can provide, and then there's the business expectation of what technology companies need to do. Okay, those are two different things, right? Everyone now is assuming, as far as technology goes, there's going to be some form. Look, we live in the enterprise, or let's say this: we live in the world of business technology. All right, that's not the same entirely, although it's becoming increasingly similar to consumer technology. From a business side, there's a number of expectations that have occurred when it comes to what a technology will support. One of them is communications being probably the biggest additional thing that they need to support. It's why companies everywhere are building integrations with Zoom. Even if it's a company like a Creatio, let's say, who does highly integrated sales, marketing, customer service, low code, no code, they do all these really very nice things with their platform and with their solutions. Communications integration becomes something that someone's looking for. It's very similar actually to when social became something that was more than just a nice, like a cool thing. It became an actual means to communicate. So now that we're dealing with all these digital tools, like the one we're on, Zoom or On24 or some of these other ones, right? And we're also dealing with events, now, and that's another story. Like, what events platforms do you think? We have the companies that are producing business software. The software needs to add that extra communications layer now, right? It doesn't mean it has to immediately, but it has to over time be prepared to handle that as part of what people expect. And they're just beginning to expect that. What they're expecting, and this is really an important thing, what they're expecting of a technology company is during this pandemic to step up. And what that means is very simple. You're going to be judged after this is all over by what you did now as a business, especially as a business generally, but as a business technology company in particular. And if you're not doing things for not only your customers, but for the good of the world, right? People are going to remember that. They're not forgetting this. This isn't a sandbox. It's not. People remember what you did for them when they needed you, right? And what you didn't do, they remember that too. And so the expectation of business technology companies is that they're going to step up, right? And that's a different. It's not the same expectation. In the past, it was, we expect you, and still expect it. We expect you to be our partner and to work with us to effectively implement your technology and make sure we get the optimal benefit from it. It's why you have customer success. It's why you have all kinds of different units at the company to handle it. Now it's also, what do you do to step up in the crisis, right? On the technology side, it's going to be the integration of communications, right? And that is a key component that will, if you don't have it now, it's all right. But you need to have it by the end of the crisis. Let's just say that, right?
Very fair answer, and I appreciate that perspective. So let me shift gears a little bit, and we'll take it down more specifically into discussing transformations from these high level areas. And let me ask, what recommendations are you providing to businesses now that are in search of a vendor in technology to automate their front office and operational processes? Maybe what are some of the specific things that you find most important from both organizational perspective and a product offering perspective?
Well, I mean, look, ultimately, keep in mind the world that I inhabit and that really you inhabit too, which is we're in a customer facing world. That's our part of the world. So obviously, right. I'm not sitting there and talking to them about the best accounting systems or financial systems they should use, because I don't know. When it comes to customer facing sales, marketing, service, one thing we've noted in the course of this, of course, is that customer service has become even more important than it historically had been. You have to have some sort of way of interacting and communicating with the company, so that, and self-service has become even equally as important. So one of the things I've been talking to a lot of companies about, a lot of the practitioner side companies about, is making sure that if in the past where I always would have said sales is probably the first thing you want to look at, I'm now saying sales and service you need to look at simultaneously. Marketing still a little less so, but sales and service are the things you have to look at simultaneously now. Even if you have none of that, you need to look at both, okay? Because it's not just a matter of what can you do to optimize your ability to close a deal, but what comes during it and after it now matters a great deal more even than it did prior to, right? The other thing, which I always recommend, is when you're looking at SFA or Salesforce automation or customer service, as a practitioner company, look for technologies that provide the capability to enable the outcomes you're looking for, not the features you need, right? The outcomes you're looking for. I said, this is outcomes based. I always, that, by the way, predates any of this stuff, but that's something that doesn't change, right? Ultimately, if I'm an SFA, let's say, I'm looking for Salesforce automation, I want to have talked to the technology company about my objectives and what I'm looking to do. And the technology company then needs to come back to me and say, okay, well, given that, here's kind of the solution that we can craft from our platform or from our solution set we already have, or whatever form this particular company happens to work with. Here's what we think will help you enable the successful outcomes you're looking for and reach whatever objectives you're reaching. And then, obviously, and that's where the other thing you have to look at from the standpoint of the expectations in detail are the support for that technology from that company, right? And that's where not just customer success, but just as simple as help desk and customer service, right? How much time, well, and especially during now, when companies are being besieged by that's actually a very serious question, because look, many years ago, look, I get asked as an analyst, I get asked a lot about, well, who do you recommend to do X, right?
Sure.
I don't really know the answer to that. I don't know anything about the company asking me that, right? I know, oh, you're this company. I may even know their name, but how, without requirements analysis and everything else I would sit down and do, how in the world would I possibly actually know what's best? I don't. But what I can suggest, and what I do suggest, is a short list of companies, and many times you guys are on that, that is basically, given the outcomes you just described to me, these are companies that can probably handle that. Specifically how, you'll have to talk to them. So off the record, not off the record, but obviously, let's say without names being named, there's this is sort of an example. I know of a very, very, very large deal coming down the pike on a practitioner side. And it requires something that, not in your universe, but I literally was talking to the person who was asking for some help and said, who are the company we should contact to work with to get the deal off from this RFP? And ultimately, we came up with one after conversation. Now, do I think they're a perfect fit? I don't know the details of the RFP, but I do know what the outcomes that they were looking for were. And this company would be a very good fit for that. But that's how you think about these things, right? Which is, from my standpoint, I would put you on a short list if I'm looking for integrated CRM, and let's say, and I don't mean to typecast you here a little, but I am going to kind of do that.
Okay.
Right. I'm looking for the mid-market, right? And I'm looking for, and I'm sure you can bleed to the enterprise, but if I'm being absolutely down the middle here, right? I'm looking for the mid-market and I'm looking for an integrated CRM solution. You're definitely on my short list. And again, are you the perfect company for the one I'm talking to? I don't actually know that. But I do know, given the outcomes they described, that you're likely to be a very, very good candidate. And then I'll connect you and them, and you guys go and figure it out. But that's how to think about this now. It's outcomes, outcomes, and outcomes.
Paul, thank you for that answer. You've talked a lot about outcomes, and previously you talked about the need for the communication layer. Can you take a moment and elaborate a little further on other functionality and capabilities that you see evolving because of the customer needs that you'd mentioned previously?
Well, I mean, this is where marketing automation kind of comes in, and I'm using the classic term deliberately here, not MarTech per se, just because I think the MarTech landscape is a total mess. So here's the story. I mean, one of the things that's occurred in this crisis has been enormous amount of new noise, like just an enormous amount of noise, meaning messages and communications that are attacking individual people en masse. We used to say it was 3,000 a day. It's probably, and again, just metaphorical, it's probably quadrupled since then, right? So marketing automation, so meaning the marketing tools we have available to us, have to evolve to the point where they are not just providing, let's call it personalized offers, which is 90% of what personalization means now, but actually personalized knowledge that lead to interaction. And also, and this is the part that a lot of companies are just beginning to address on the MarTech or marketing automation side, is the ability to interact and communicate with that individual at the point that they're making that personalized effort. Okay, so for example, if everyone knows, campaigns, right? And campaigns are beginning to kind of, I'm not going to get into this, is a whole other discussion, but campaigns are beginning to disappear as very viable things, viable approaches.
Right.
A while yet. Marketers will go crazy when they hear me say that, but over time, campaigns will begin to disappear. Let's just say that, as viable approaches to communicate. But assuming they're around for a while, you're starting to see more and more companies begin to personalize the campaigns, right? And that's based on the fact that there's an enormous amount of social data available to them. All right. However, the problem that historically has been, and this is being overcome now by the technology specifically, is that if you look at systems of record and traditional systems of record, they're important, they're critical, but they're passive vehicles for data, meaning they pull in all this data, they create customer records, and then when you can, so to speak, or when you need to, you act on that up with something, whatever the analytic result you're looking for is. Now, what makes it difficult is that you have to actually do that in real time as the data literally is coming in, right? It doesn't mean you have to do it on that particular customer, but you have to do it as data is actually flowing into a system of record, and probably another name. I'm not talking about CDPs here because the hype there is so off the charts, it's not worth talking about right now. But I'm talking about an active system of record. You want to call it a CDP out there? Feel free. The idea, though, is that the data is flowing in, the customer is moving, right, and is acting, and you literally have to begin to both analyze that data and come out with that personalized interaction and communicate with the customer as all of that is actually occurring live. Right now, is anyone perfectly there yet? No. Are people evolving to that? Yes, absolutely. There's technologies and additional layers of technology out there that are being created to actually handle that. There's platform layers that are being created to handle that. There are specific solution sets. There are, let's say, app level additions. So among them, like the APIs, and there are a million different ways that companies are actually approaching this, but ultimately they lead to the same thing, which is separating all the signal from the noise, right? And then at the same time, personalizing the interactions with the customers or the prospects or the people you're just connecting to for the first time. And all in all, accomplishing what you need to, but live and in real time, as close to real time as you can, right? So those technologies are not only, let's call it, necessary for evolution, but are actually being evolved as we speak. I've seen multiple examples across the industry of approaches and different ways to do them. The other area which has become increasingly important in terms of technology that we have to specifically look at is it really is on the customer service side. And it basically takes sort of two forms now. One of them is really, I wouldn't call it technically customer service, it's success management technologies, which are increasingly being used throughout the industry because it's necessary to understand how to measure against customer success without constantly upselling and cross-selling to your customers being the only measurement you have, right? Which is a ridiculous measurement when you're trying to actually, help customers be successful. It doesn't mean help you sell more, right?
Right.
Right. It doesn't mean I sold more, therefore they are successful. No, that doesn't work. So that's why actually, on another level, if I'm being strategic, when I talk about customer success teams and metrics to like clients, I say, just make sure of one thing that's not there, which is a revenue metric. People are demanding them more quickly. The other is, and this is equally as important, is it can't be in the realm of just developers anymore, right? It has to be in the realm of business users, and they have to be able to put together, I'll call them solutions, which is usually with the business user probably stretching the definition because they really aren't developers, right? So, but they do need to come up with some capabilities for them, their teams, their department, whatever, that they need to accomplish what they need, again, because time is so short and competition is so broad and fierce and all of these things. So low code, no code becomes the means to both, right? Get it up fast and get it out from get a business user to do it, right? I mean, those two alone make all the value in the world. And there's so many other, obviously a ton of value with developers and the like. And, I still remember one thing that used to always impress me about coming to Creatio or BPM Online events was you did this thing at lunch where somebody would take Studio, which is the low code, no code platform. And over lunch, they would build an application. And then it was literally, they had 2 or 3 people doing that. And they come back with 2 or 3 applications that they show on stage. And, lunch was like a little short, but it was like half hour, right? Right. So, and half hour later, there'd be 3 reasonably good applications that are being shown on the stage. And that was in the earlier days of Studio. So, that's what I'm saying. Low code, no code is actually, look, you guys were early adapters, but meaning one of the first to market using it. A lot of companies have picked up on that now, and companies that you wouldn't even expect, but they have, because they understand that it's one of the ways to go. And in crisis times, again, the ability to do things effectively and quickly it's really, really important and mission critical, really. And so that's another area I think that on the technology side that has, let's say, taken on, it hasn't really evolved like to huge magnitudes. It's, of course, right. It's evolved as it goes along, but it's taken on a massive increase in importance.
So, Paul, that's interesting that you talk about that, because I was going to ask you next, what should we expect personally from Paul, in 2021 and on different topics? And I wonder if low code, no code makes the list. Are there interesting research pieces or initiatives that you'll be making in 2021? Maybe we can break some news on a new book or anything like that.
Here's some breaking news. I'm never writing another business book, ever.
Okay.
I wrote
any other research or initiatives?
Yeah, well, look, I have a lot of initiatives going. Like, for example, one of the ones that I find very important is the evolution of e-commerce, and I'm beginning to look into that on a much more serious way. So, for example, I am, and you'll see more and more coming out of me pretty soon, I am on a tear to convince the world that you can't treat transactions as separate from interactions, which is how it's treated. There's transactions. Remember, you always hear this transactional data, and then you have this interactional, meaning social and other data. Now, transactions are a subset of interaction, and that's how it has to be seen, especially with the rise in importance of e-commerce. Because if you're not thinking that way, you're missing a major opportunity to understand who your customer is and what they're doing. And that means on a different level, you'll see me talking and writing more, and I think most companies are missing this, on getting even beyond, because my focus the last several years has been customer engagement. Right. But you'll be seeing more on employee customer engagement. You'll be seeing more from me on journey orchestration and things like that, because I think a lot of companies claim to have it and don't do it. They just have journey building, which is not journey orchestration, that's graphic workflow. So journey tracking and how that actually works. And you'll see more on that, because all of this involves how people are interacting with other people. You'll see on another level, I'm looking at, and this is I'll call it a side level, the rise of the citizen celebrity and the celebrity is citizen, right? And well, you know,
Yeah, elaborate on that if you will. Well,
so here, and this is one thing the pandemic accelerated massively. So rise of citizen celebrity. That's an easy one, really. There are kids, let's say. Well, here, a good example. There's this dad and his daughter, and the dad's name is Matt Shaw, and the daughter's name is Savannah Shaw. The daughter's 15, dad's 40s, maybe. Pretty well off, but not wealthy. Both of them have fantastic singing voices. I mean, really genuinely fantastic singing voices. So they did a rendition months ago of the prayer, you know, Josh Groban, that
right.
Andrea Bocelli, that prayer. And they got like 10 million views or something like that immediately. Wow. Well, what's happened though, they've developed almost a franchise. So what's grown up around them, for example, is a community, and the community around them actually produces their videos online now. In addition to that, they have a record, right? They just released, they have I don't know who the label is, but they have a label, they have a record. They've been on Good Morning America, et cetera, et cetera. Citizen celebrity, right? The ride, they no one would have a clue who they were if it weren't for the fact we were locked down during a pandemic, right? But there's a lot of that going on out there. And actually, the more you dig, the more you find. And then when I say find, it's just that you haven't found them, but 10 million other people have.
Right.
There's a 15-year-old Irish singer. They call the people who sing on the street and buskers. Mm-hmm. And Ireland has like a very big tradition of that. So in Dublin, there's a street corner in Dublin. All of these people go and sing. And there's one girl, I think she's probably 15. Her name is Ali Sherlock. And when she was 12, she was on Ellen and things like that. But she's got a good voice. It's kind of that bluesy kind of voice. So like half of what she sings is really good and half isn't. But she's got, every time I look, she gets another 100,000 followers. She has 3.8 million followers, right? And that's what I'm saying. But that's the rise of the citizen celebrity. Now you have the celebrity as citizen. And this is an interesting study in the do's and don'ts.
Okay.
So when this all started, I don't know how many of you remember this, but there was a show that was done by, oh God, I'm blocking his name right now. John, the guy from The Office. Hold on.
The British or the American? Steve Carell?
The American. No. John Krasinski.
Oh, yes.
John Krasinski. I couldn't believe I could not forget his name. So he did this show called SGN. It was called, that means Some Good News. And the entire show was John and his wife is, what's her name?
Emily Blunt, I think.
Emily Blunt, yes. Yeah. Emily Blunt. It was mostly him, but she would pop in every now and then. You know, she's very funny too, and he's very funny. So the two of them it was a good humored show. And what he would do is two things: good news, and he would hook citizens to celebrities. So for example, he went to the frontline workers in, I think, Brockton, Massachusetts or something like that, or from a hospital there. And he literally, in the midst of the crisis, and they're all, of course, sadly, because I'm a Yankees fan, Red Sox fan. And so is he, which is also sad. But that notwithstanding, he bused them all socially distanced on the bus to Fenway Park, and they were all masked. And then on those giant jumbotrons, first the governor of Massachusetts thanked them for their work, then the mayor of Boston, and then the entire Red Sox team, one after another, including Big Papi, who was no longer part of it, thanked them. And then they had a guy at home plate, and each of them got to throw a first pitch from the mound to home plate. It was fantastic. And when proms were being canceled all over the world, he held a virtual prom, and John Legend sang, and I mean, it's like that, right? And it was great. It was a fantastic show. It ran 8 episodes. And he was connecting to just ordinary people doing wonderful or ordinary things, just to make them happy. This little girl had her tickets to Hamilton canceled. He got the original cast of Hamilton to sing to her, including Lin-Manuel Miranda, right? I mean, he has that kind of pull. But here's the lesson. And this is why I'm studying these things, because they're actually very important in terms of identifying how people are thinking in times of crisis and after. and how marketing that's going to have to work too. So he stops the show after 8 episodes. And then about 2 weeks later, start reading, the show was sold to CBS, and he's not even going to be part of it. He just sold it. And well, you destroy all your credibility in the space of one thing, right? I mean, look, I don't doubt his good intent. I really don't. He's a good guy. But doing that was just beyond crass. He doesn't need money. It's like the guy why not just do something for good and leave it there, right? But he couldn't do it. He didn't do it. And so, but that's, again, celebrity is citizen celebrity, right? So that's another area of research. I have a million others, but I won't get into it now. It's just take well beyond.
Well, that actually is one of the questions, though, that folks were interested in me asking you. Those is along those lines of additional research that is towards subjects relevant to 2020, the pandemic, the tumultuous year, because all of us dialing, I mean, this is a remote event that we're all participating in for that very reason. So it's still front of mind for folks. So feel free to elaborate on any other research that you're doing.
Well, the other one I'm doing a lot of research, which I'm actually bringing into my advisory work, is virtual events and how to do them right. Because I will tell you, in the tech world, I mean, you guys are doing this one is super interesting to me. And I'm really curious as to how you're going to pull it all off. I'm going to pay attention. I'm just speaking now as a analyst, okay, not as a friend of Creatio here, because you've got 200 tracks, or 7 languages, 24 hours, and presumably a lot of people are going to be listening in from a lot of countries on that.
Yes.
And well, you guys, I will tell you one thing about Creatio historically is you are literally a paradigm on how a company that's not the size of an Oracle or an SAP pulls off amazing events, and really with substantial audiences. I still remember it was about a year and a half ago, there was like 5,000 in Kiev and 3,500 in Petersburg and St. Petersburg and things like that. I mean, that's astounding numbers for a company your size, to be perfectly honest. And I mean, genuinely astounding, but it also shows the pull you have, and also your willingness to be creative in how you approach things. You approach one thing that, for example, in virtual events that you do very well, and this is something that I do advise customers on it, you approach them with good humor. You do. You approach them effectively in a good mood, right? And consequently, you'll do some things that others will not. Most other people in the tech world think that when you do an event, it has to be specifically. It's either specifically to the tech, or it's completely separate from it. So you have tech discussions, hundreds of them, and then a day of mindfulness. But right, you guys, to your strength, is all of that's fully integrated. Both of them are fully integrated throughout the whole thing. It's never, there's no bifurcation, right? So, you have Catherine on the stage, and she is a much better speaker than she thinks she is. She's a tremendous speaker, and she radiates that kind of, goodwill to everybody. And then when we were in Miami, about a year ago, you had that guy who, he seemed to be the fitness guru in the early morning radio show in Miami. And I mean, I don't care about that particularly, but he was a good guy and he was different. And you had, I think it was Chris Parry, who was what, an admiral the guy's like mind-blowingly good at what he does. And who would think to bring an ex-admiral and, master academician onto an event? You guys would. And the guy is utterly fantastic, right? So that's what I'm saying. That's how you thought. That kind of creativity is really important, especially in a virtual event, because the distraction level is massive. Another little thing that comes up when you're doing virtual events. If you're doing tracks, I don't know, I may be cutting your throat when I say this, because I have no idea how long yours are. Make them 10, 15, 20 minutes, no more. And again, I don't know how long yours are. Why? Distraction. People are distracted constantly. So you keep it within their range of distraction, right? Like one company everyone was 10 minutes, except one I did, which was 11, right? Well, that's tip. I always go over. I just do. I kept my record intact, right? So, but another thing, immersive and interactive is really, really important. So one of the things that has led to is a review of event platforms, right? And the one that honestly I'm finding to be so far the best is one called Intrado, right? Fantastic platform. I've seen 4 companies use them recently, and coincidentally, I happen to know a senior executive from there who literally just left a week ago. I had no idea because they had changed the name to Intrado. I had no idea they were the same company. So that platform, I haven't talked to anyone at Intrado, but I've looked into the platform deeply. It's fantastic. And why? It encourages interactivity. It's visually interesting. It's very flexible in design. You can run an event over a long period of time without losing the thread. It's a very connectivity efficient, and yet the graphics are still, let's call it higher bar, it's still really nice, attractive graphics. That's another one. Another area to go to, it depends on the company, is immersive, right? Because there's a guy, a CTO of another tech company who said on CRM Players one time, because I've always made the point, in the pre-COVID world, all companies have to be more theatrical than they are, right? In the tech world, the bar has been set that way, and you have to have theater. You have to. It's not, and there's no shame in that. It's a good thing. But when people are at your conference and they leave your conference a year later, even if they don't remember the theme, it's in their head that I don't remember what it was about, but really had a good time, right? And that's actually important. Why? Because it's how your company is painted in their head, right? And that's the emotional state, right? Matters. So I look at those things. So this one guy, he was on the show, CTO of another tech company, and we weren't even talking about it, but he said, well, in this time, we have to move from being theatrical to cinematic. And he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And well, think of an Adobe Creative Cloud or something, Photoshop, etc. Just look at the graphics, that kind of stuff produced. There's a company called Immersion Studios or Immersive Studios that did NVIDIA's conference, I believe. And just look at that. Now those are big stage productions in a matter of speed.
Right.
You don't have to have that. But immersion and interaction matters a lot in virtual. So I'm going deep into virtual. Another person I recommend if you're actually interested in virtual events is John Reed, who's more on the ERP side of the analyst world. He's one of the leading, he is arguably the leading, he and his business colleague, Dennis Howlett of Diginomica, are probably the 2 leading ERP analysts in the world. And John has written tons on virtual events that I think is very valuable, but that's an area of research I am digging in deeply, and I'm integrating how to do that into my actual portfolio of advisory work, right? Which, and believe me, honestly, it aided me in when I built this studio I'm speaking to you from. If you saw what was here before, what you're seeing right now, let's put it this way, I was one big shadow, right? So, right. And, but I spent a lot of money and I learned it, and I sat and I've learned everything from the tech of it, audio flows and, lighting and how that impacts what. And like right now I have a tiny little RGB light, which is lighting up that little back wall with a blue. And you see, my camera's a little off, as you can probably tell, because the black, but that's the stuff when it comes to virtual events, when it comes to live streaming and broadcasting, which companies also need to think about. And when it comes to doing happy hours, which they need to think about to keep the interaction up. And you guys are very good at that because I know I was on one. Those are things you have to do. And so I'm making sure I understand approach, procedure, methodology, etc., and tools that you need to do it at a budget level, at a mid-level, and at a blow the doors off and jump straight down the rabbit hole level.
Well, given your perspective and your attention, we'll be very interested in hearing your feedback at the conclusion of this Accelerate Global event, and welcome that very much. Let me just take an additional moment to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us here today. This has been amazing, really great, and look forward to further conversations in the future. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was wonderful.